I'm Catherine Barron with Thoughts on Public Education in California. It's a great honor today to speak with Andreas Schleicher, head of the Education Division at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Welcome. I want to get into PISA right away. One major initiative of OECD, the organization, is the exam known as PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. And it started in 2000, right? Every 3 years, 15-year-olds, a random sampling of 15-year-olds are tested in reading, math, and science.
Problem solving as well, digital literacy.
Oh, okay.
So it's expanding in its coverage.
It is. Oh, so what's included in it now?
Well, we're now working currently on an assessment of collaborative skills, collaborative problem solving. That's in development. We hope to have it ready by 2015, but sort of we try to embrace a broader range of competencies, those skills that matter for the success of young people today.
Well, I was wondering, what's been the impact of PISA on countries' educational programs since they've been seeing their results? What kinds of changes have there been?
It actually varies a lot across countries. I mean, in most countries, PISA had an impact in the sense that countries for the first time could see themselves in the mirror of what is possible in education. And I think what PISA has achieved is that countries were seeing themselves through the lens of other kind of paradigms, perspectives, and it has led to some very significant changes. My own country, Germany, is a great example where people were quite surprised, shocked by the results, because Germany came out just so-so on the performance. There's also large social disparities, whereas people had believed, schools get the same money, teachers get the same salary, so things should be similar. Wasn't like this. Immigrant students doing quite badly, and that led to quite a number of reforms. I mean, the federal government increased investment in education by 40% within a year. That was on the financial side, but in terms of substance, teachers agreed to increase their working hours. So everybody made a part, and if you look at the results in 2009, they were a lot better. And Japan is an interesting case. They scored really well in PISA 2000, one of the top performers, but they were not happy with the kind of picture they saw. They were good at rote learning tasks, not so good at tasks that required students to construct responses and so on. They put their efforts in this, and 10 years later, they did a lot better on that as well. So you can see but it's not true everywhere. There were some countries where PISA had a very limited impact only.
What about the United States? What kind of impact have we?
I don't think there was really much of an impact in the year 2000 when the results came first out. I think the big impact came in 2006. And I don't know why this happened at that year, but that got a lot of attention at that point among and led to initiatives among governors. The Common Core Standards Initiative was a lot inspired by this kind of international benchmarking. The National Governors Association issued a brief on international benchmarking. So I think it started in 2006 with quite a debate on this. And I think you can see that today. I mean, there's more and more interest in the United States in other education systems, other perspectives, and so I think this.
But in 2009, we didn't really do measurably better.
In science, there was a little bit of progress, but no, that's quite true. Overall, the United States performance has mainly been unchanged, and that also explains to some extent why the United States now relatively does worse on many indicators in the OECD, because in a fair number of countries, there have been real improvements in outcomes.
You had said in one of the discussions that I've heard you in that it's not so much that the United States has fallen, but all these other countries have learned from us and from PISA, and they're doing better. So when you put it in that perspective, we don't look like we're doing so well. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the world has changed. Skill demands are rising, and in many countries, education is a lot more important now than it was in the past. Sort of countries realizing that their success, the success of individuals and nations, increasingly depends on their education performance. And so there's been a lot of effort and investment made in education in many countries, really, and particularly in Asia, but not just. I think this is a general trend that systems are improving. You can look, I mean, Brazil is an extreme case, In 2000, they were at the bottom of the league, really way behind everybody else. And but they didn't accept those results. And they had only 50% of the 15-year-old population in school at that point. And sort of even people having no education at all, and that has really quite significantly changed. They've got more people into school, raising quality and equity, so quite a...
I'm guessing that you visit a lot of classrooms around the world when you're traveling. And I was wondering if you could describe what are some of the differences in classes in the top performing nations and in those that are maybe more middle of the road?
Even that varies a lot. If you go to a class in Finland, you find a very varied instruction. You find teachers really capable of seeing how different students learn differently and tailoring their instruction to individual students' needs. Sort of this idea of personalization in education, you really find that in a country like Finland. If you go to Japan, you are struck by how much initiative is with students in terms of collaborative learning. Opportunities for people to for students to work together in groups in different forms of learning. If you go to Shanghai in China, you find, the enormous commitment made by individual students. You really see how much attention there is. There's not a minute lost, not a second lost in instruction. So in different, what I do think is in common is that student-teacher relationships are very strong, and you can see that as an outsider, sort of teachers engaging with students beyond sort of just delivering instruction. High level of interaction, a lot of initiative with the students. I think those are some of the features that you see across cultures, but then there's a lot of issues that are really specific still to styles and cultures.
Well, when you were talking about that the United States hasn't really progressed that much on PISA, I'm curious, I know you said that there have been things like Common Core and the National Governors Association taking this on. At the same time, at the federal level, we have had Race to the Top and a lot of push toward assessment and high stakes testing and using that to evaluate teachers. Where does that fit in with what the top performing nations are doing? Is that sort of still going in the old direction?
Well, I think the Common Core standards hold a lot of promise. I wouldn't underrate the potential impact they can have eventually on what happens in classrooms. Giving teachers, giving students, giving principals, giving parents a clear aspiration of what good performance really looks like, and it's quite well benchmarked against what high-performing systems do in terms of the ambition. I think the challenge is to translate that into instructional practices, and clearly when you compare the US with high-performing nations put perhaps less emphasis on vertical systems of accountability, information management, and more emphasis on lateral accountability. They're basically trying to enable teachers to learn from teachers, schools to learn from schools, sort of to building more stronger networks to share innovation. But Race to the Top, teacher evaluation is a very important part in many countries, not just to the US. I think, again, it's a matter of the methods being used. The United States putting a lot of emphasis on student learning outcomes tests, trying to tie teacher performance to student tests. That's not what you see in many high-performing nations, but teacher evaluation is also important there, but often pursued in other means. There's a lot more emphasis on judgment, greater trust in the profession as well, sort of greater peer learning. And so it's not that teacher evaluation is less of a topic there, but it's the kind of means those countries use that are often quite different from what you typically see here.
Can you talk about trust for a moment?
Yeah, trust is hard to build, easy to destroy, and we all know that. But it's one of the striking features, particularly of an education system like Finland, where you do have trust among teachers in the profession, trust between government and education delivery, and they achieve this with a high level of transparency in the system. Classrooms are open. Teachers watch what other teachers are doing. The information is available to parents. Sort of trust is built through a very high level of openness and transparency in the system. But that's very hard to emulate now. But it's true, I don't think just in the teaching profession. I think in any kind of knowledge-based profession, you can't manage people on an assembly line. You have to rely on a profession. That's sort of obviously much harder to achieve, but they're great examples. I think the Nordic countries in Europe are really very, very strong on that. Some of the Asian systems, I think, are doing very well. But I don't think you can, it's going to be very hard to replace trust with systems of control. No?
Right. Well, where would you sort of rank the United States in trust, particularly when it comes to teachers?
Yeah, that's hard to say. I mean, the mechanisms that are being used in the United States of accountability are largely ones of external accountability. You don't see sort of evaluation playing the kind of role it plays in classrooms and schools that you see in some of the high-performing nations. But maybe that's a reflection on the teaching force, the kind of teaching and learning environment. I can't judge that, but I think if you look at the instruments that are being used, they don't reflect as much trust as sort of issues of external accountability often.
What is it that gains the respect for teachers that makes them want to go into the profession in the other countries?
Well, I think, first of all, one needs to explore that with teachers themselves. No, I think teachers probably know what attracts them to the profession. Pay is certainly one aspect. Pay in the United States is comparatively low. It's also comparatively undifferentiated. And it's not necessarily sort of performance-related pay, but the fact that sort of there is career diversity, that there are opportunities for real career progression in there, sort of that maybe result in better, more money. But, take Finland again, they don't get paid that much, but they have a profession where they can engage with others. They learn from other teachers. They have a significant amount of working time that is non-teaching time, sort of professional collaboration, professional development. And those things probably count as much as the money part for the attractiveness of the profession. I basically think it's a transition from what I call industrial environment in which you work, where you have someone who thinks what should be taught, someone else who's delivering that, and so on, to a professional environment where those who are in the front line are owning their profession. And those things probably matter more in terms of the attractiveness than the money part. At least that's what we get from teacher surveys. Sort of the financial parts are, when you ask teachers, they usually rank sort of in the middle, but the top end are the attributes of the work environment, the support, career perspectives. If you tell a person who's 25-year-old, you are in school, you're going to be a math teacher, and 25 years from now, you're still going to be in that school a math teacher. And you tell young people that there is no future for them, and that's very different in many of the high-performing nations where you do progress, and also the progression doesn't just lead into bureaucracy. You become a school principal, administrator, but it is a true professional progression.
Well, in Singapore, I followed someone
Singapore's a
around.
great example
Yeah.
for those things, no?
And it was interesting because they specifically talked about these 3 career paths. So if you didn't want to go into administration, you could become a master teacher, or you could go into curriculum development. And so it did open up a lot more avenues within teaching that weren't just the principal's office. Is that the kind of thing that you see?
Absolutely. I think if you tell people that you're a teacher and then you become a bureaucrat, you're telling them that their profession in itself isn't valued. Really, I think if you build a career path where it's in the profession, you can become a teacher, a better teacher, you can become a teacher of other teachers, you can become a curriculum developer, and so on. I think you give a very different aspiration of the value that you place on a profession, and you retain your best teachers in the profession.
Andreas Schleicher, thank you very much for speaking with us
Thank
today.
you.
I'm Catherine Barron, and this is Thoughts on Public Education.